Welcome back to Nerdscape Odyssey. I'm Tyler, the gaming dad, and today I'm joined by my co-host and wife, Ashley, the nerd mom. Now, everyone says they've read The Lord of the Rings, right? It's a book that sits on countless shelves like a badge of intellectual honor. A silent announcement that you appreciate high fantasy in dense, epic literature. But what if Amazon's The Rings of Power, a show that many have blasted for not being real Tolkien, accidentally exposed a massive lie at the heart of the fandom? What if the loudest critics were unknowingly proving that they have actually never read one part of the book that's most essential to this story? The appendices. The storm around this show isn't just about creative liberties. It's a pop quiz. And a surprising number of people are actually failing, revealing that one of the most beloved books in the world is also one of the most frequently lied about books in the world.
Let's start with a bold claim. The Lord of the Rings is consistently one of the books people lie most about having read. Several surveys back this up, including a notable one commissioned by the BBC that places Tolkien's masterpiece in the top 3, right alongside George Orwell's 1984.
Yeah.
Another poll found that many people lie about reading certain books to seem more intelligent or to join in on a conversation. And Lord of the Rings is a conversation.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a conversation starter. Everybody talks about it.
Exactly. Why? The reasons are deeply human. For many, being well-read is attractive. In our culture, having read The Lord of the Rings isn't just about enjoying a story. It's a status symbol. With over 150 million copies sold, its cultural footprint is immense, and nobody wants to feel left out. It's the fear of missing out, essentially.
Exactly. People want to seem more intelligent to be more popular. But there's a huge gap between owning the book and actually finishing it. Tolkien's prose isn't a light read at all. It's dense, packed with huge descriptions, songs, poems. It's all written in a deliberate archaic style that mimics the epic sagas it was modeled on. For most, it's far easier to absorb the story through Peter Jackson's brilliant films, which actually masterfully distills the core narrative. People get the gist from this. They know the characters, they've seen the spectacle, and so they nod along, claiming readership to get the cultural points without actually doing the literary heavy lifting. For decades, this little white lie was absolutely harmless. You could coast on movie knowledge and no one would know any better because they were doing so well. Then Amazon spent billions of dollars and suddenly the lie became so very obvious.
Yup. When The Rings of Power was announced, a vocal part of the fandom reacted with swift and brutal criticism. This isn't Tolkien. They're making it all up. Galadriel would never do that.
That's a lot of the comments we got on our video.
And you know what? I do kind of I see Galadriel in The Rings of Power and Galadriel in the Lord of the Rings movies. Very different. I myself am curious to see how she developed and what happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that, she would never do that. It's, no, how did the character develop? The arguments were framed as the righteous fury of devoted fans, guardians of a sacred text, protecting the purity of the professor's work from a soulless corporation.
Yeah. But a funny thing actually happened there. The more specific the complaints got, the more they exposed a fundamental misunderstanding, not of Tolkien's work as a whole, but of what the Rings of Power was actually adapting. The show was never meant to be a direct adaptation of The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. The story of Bilbo and Frodo actually take place in the Third Age of Middle-earth. The Rings of Power, as the name implies, is set thousands of years earlier, in the Second Age.
The key events of the Second Age, the forging of the Great Rings, the rise and fall of the island kingdom of Numenor, the last alliance of elves and men are not the main plot of any of Tolkien's novels.
And this is the biggest misunderstanding people have.
Exactly. They're the background lore, the ancient history that gives the world its incredible depth. In the main trilogy, these events are mentioned in conversations.
Yeah.
They're recalled in poems, or they're briefly summarized, like at the Council of Elrond. So, if the story isn't in The Lord of the Rings, where did Amazon get it? The answer is in a place where most self-proclaimed readers decided to stop reading.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a book titled The Fall of Numenor was released in 2022. It's actually compiled history that's edited by Brian Sibley. It collects the Tolkien's scattered writings from various sources, such as unfinished tales in the history of Middle-earth, into a single chronological volume, rather than being an original novel written as a single narrative arc. I've met many people who stated that they read this and that it proves that the Rings of Power got it all wrong. And those people, I always say, well, he clearly didn't actually read it. And while there are limited extended narratives from this period, such as Eldarion and Arendis, the Mariner's Wife, even these remained unfinished and were published posthumously. Tolkien gave us like a skeleton of what happened, but the full narrative, that was the show's job to connect the dots.
You know what's funny? Every time we say Numenor, I'm playing Skyrim currently. All I'm hearing is Numenix.
Yeah, I wonder if that's where they got it.
The source material for The Rings of Power comes almost entirely from the appendices at the end of The Return of the King.
That's right.
If you've read the book cover to cover, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, let me break it down. After Frodo sails into the West, Tolkien gives us over 100 pages of extra material. These aren't exciting chapters, they're dense, they're historical documents presented as if they were real texts from within Middle-earth itself.
Yeah.
You get the family trees, you get the pronunciation guides, notes on calendars, and, most importantly, Appendix A and Appendix B. So you have Appendix A, Annals of the Kings and Rulers. It gives abbreviated histories of Numenor, Arnor, and Gondor. Appendix B, The Tale of Years, is a timeline, a chronological list of major events in the Second and Third Ages.
And that's it. This is the raw material. It's not a novel, it's a historical outline. Tolkien tells us what happened, but not always how or why. For example, the timeline states that around the year 1500 of the Second Age, the elven smiths taught by Sauron in disguise begin forging the Rings of Power. In 3319, Numenor is destroyed. The events that the show pulls from are scattered across a handful of pages in total. The showrunners were given a skeleton of a story and had to connect all these dots, filling in enormous gaps between the timeline entry and the next. Tolkien himself even presents this material as scholarly work, and the showrunners have said their goal was to dramatize the novel that Tolkien never actually wrote about the Second Age. This distinction, that they were adapting a historical summary, not a finished story, is a crucial point that most of the show's loudest critics actually miss.
Now that we understand the source material, let's look at the big complaints and see how they reveal a total ignorance of the appendices.
And before anyone actually comments, hopefully you make it this far in the video, because any comments you have about this not being Tolkien's work, I mean, all this is going to make you sound like idiots.
Yeah, we're going to explain it. Trust me, we're getting to the good part. But one of the loudest criticisms was aimed at Galadriel, who was portrayed as a fierce warrior commander obsessed with hunting down Sauron. Galadriel is a serene, mystical lady, not a warrior, the critics cried, thinking only of Kate.
That was my favorite.
Yeah, and of course, like many others, thinking only of Cate Blanchett's ethereal performance in the movies, which she did incredible, by the way.
Oh yeah, definitely.
They remembered her from the Third Age, after millennia of personal growth. But what do Tolkien's own notes say about her in her youth? In his later writings, Tolkien described the younger Galadriel as proud, ambitious, and athletic, even having an Amazon disposition.
Like the Rings of Power.
Right? While Amazon didn't have the rights to unfinished tales where some of these descriptions appeared, the characterization of a more headstrong Galadriel is rooted in Tolkien's own evolving ideas about her past.
That's
The
right.
Serene Lady came much, much later. The show's portrayal, while compressed for TV, is arguably more aligned with Tolkien's notes on her early character than a perpetually placid elf queen.
Exactly. And another huge point of contention was the timeline. Critics correctly noted that the show condenses thousands of years of the Second Age's history into a much shorter period. A betrayal of the lore, they shouted, but they failed to mention that the showrunners were actually upfront about this. A completely faithful adaptation of the Tale of Years timeline would actually mean human characters dying of old age every few episodes, while the elves just never changed. And how the hell are you supposed to get connected to characters who die every 2 episodes? It would be unfilmable to create a coherent narrative. They compressed events. It's a legitimate creative choice, one you can agree or disagree with, but acting like it's an ignorant mistake is to fundamentally misunderstand the challenge of adapting a timeline instead of a novel.
Then there are the rings. A common complaint was that the show got the forging sequence wrong. Critics screamed that the 3 elven rings were forged after Sauron left Eregion, a lore-breaking change. But here's the thing. In the appendices, if you read them, specifically in the Tale of Years, the timeline is explicit.
That's right.
The elven smiths, they actually began forging the rings of power around SA 1500. Around 1590, the 3 rings for the elves were completed by Celebrimbor in secret and without Sauron's direct help. Then, around 1600, Sauron forged the 1 ring to control all the others. The show actually followed the sequence from the appendices. The lie the critics believed was based on a simplified reading of the opening poem, not the detailed historical notes at the back of the book they claimed to have read.
Yeah, exactly. Now, here's where it actually gets even more interesting. The very idea of a single, pure, unchangeable canon that the gatekeepers claim to defend is itself a misunderstanding of how Tolkien actually built his world. He created a brilliant framing device. His stories are not objective histories. They are presented as translations of an in-universe document called the Red Book of Westmarch.
In World, The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings were written by Bilbo and Frodo, with additional add-ons, I guess, by Sam.
Yeah.
They are Hobbit-centric accounts of things that they either saw themselves or heard about from others. They are, by any definition, unreliable narrators. Tolkien even had fun with this. In the first edition of The Hobbit in 1937, Bilbo's story of how he got the ring from Gollum is a lie. He says Gollum willingly gave it to him as a prize. We all know that would not happen.
No.
It was only after writing The Lord of the Rings that Tolkien went back and actually changed the story in later editions to the version we know now. My precious.
Yeah, exactly.
Cleverly explaining that the discrepancy by saying Bilbo's first version was the lie he told everybody else, influenced by the ring.
Now, Tolkien himself treated his world as a living thing, subjected to revision. The appendices are presented as later scholarly notes, attempts by in-world historians to correct and expand on The Hobbit's original story. There are inconsistencies and different versions of the actual same events. This isn't a flaw, it's a feature. It makes Middle-earth feel like real history with conflicting sources, not a sterile, perfectly consistent fictional world. People who demand dogmatic adherence to one version of the lore are ironically ignoring the very literary frame that Tolkien actually built. They want a simple book. He gave them a fictional library. Now, where does this leave us? The point here isn't to argue that The Rings of Power is a perfect show or that you have to love it. Hate it, love it, do whatever. I don't really care. Criticisms of its pacings, dialogue, and character choices are all perfectly valid, but criticisms that come from a place of ignorance, especially an ignorance worn as a badge of superior knowledge, that deserves to be called out.
The controversy has accidentally highlighted the difference between two kinds of fandom. One is a fandom of ownership, of gatekeeping, that thinks loving something means freezing it in amber.
Yeah.
The other is a fandom of curiosity that sees the gaps in the lore not as mistakes, but as invitations to imagine, explore, and create.
The appendices aren't just dry footnotes, guys. They are a treasure trove. They are Tolkien's invitation to actually go deeper to see the vast history that lies beneath his most famous story. For years, they have been the territory of only the most dedicated fans. The Rings of Power, for all of its flaws, has brought this obscure corner of legendarium into light. It has made people curious about Numenor and Celebrimbor, and the Second Age in a way that they never were before.
I will say, watching the show, I'm very sad to see Numenor. I know Numenor falls, but I'm very sad to watch it happen.
Yeah.
Because I love Numenor. I don't
The
know.
Rings of Power is basically watching the bad guy win over and over and over again, knowing that what's going to happen.
Well, that's the thing is, obviously you're seeing how the rings were made. You know, you have the rings, you got the one that rules them all. How did that begin? Well, this is what they're saying.
Yeah, and how did he fool everybody?
Exactly.
You're seeing it.
Right? And I loved Numenor.
Everybody loved Numenor.
Yeah. Well, we're down to bringing you the solution. Honesty. It's time to stop pretending. If you haven't read The Lord of the Rings, that's fine. You can still love the world through the movies, games, and yes, even the Amazon show.
That's
just like I do.
Yeah.
Guys, I actually haven't read any of The Lord of the Rings. Just saying, I will admit it right now.
She knows basically when we talk about Lord of the Rings, I always talk about what happened in the books, what happened in the appendices, and...
Oh yeah, we'll watch the movie, we'll watch the show, and he'll be like, oh, by the way, this happened in the book. Or he'll, and that's the extent of my knowledge. So don't weaponize partial knowledge to attack others. And if you have read it, but skipped the appendices, maybe it's time to go back. See it for yourself, like the skeleton that Tolkien left for us. Understand the framework the show is built upon. Engage with the material on its own terms.
Now, in the end, the great lie about The Lord of the Rings isn't just about reading a book. It's about the clash between performative expertise and genuine engagement. The backlash to the Rings of Power has shown that many who claim to be the staunchest defenders of Tolkien's work have in fact only engaged with the most popular parts. They love the house that Tolkien built, but they never actually bothered to look at the blueprints from which he built it on.
So don't lie about the books you read. More importantly, don't let a shallow understanding of a masterpiece stop you or anyone else from enjoying new interpretations of it.
Yeah.
The real tragedy isn't that the TV show gets some things wrong. It's that so many fans have had a limited view of the book for so long. Lying about reading The Lord of the Rings doesn't make you a bigger fan.
Yeah.
In fact, understanding the true nature of its creation, including the gaps, and the conjectural histories might just make you appreciate a show like Rings of Power. Just a little bit more. Because as the appendices prove, Tolkien's world has always been meant to be explored.
Now, what do you guys actually think here? Have you actually read the appendices? Does it change how you see the show? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe for more, and we will see you next time on Nerdscape.